and to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day. It is my hope that our recent presidential election will be remembered as the greatest and most consequential election in the history of our country. As our victory showed, the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda with dramatic increases in support from virtually every element of our society, young and old, men and women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, urban, suburban, rural, and very importantly, we had a powerful win in all 7 swing states, and the popular vote, we won by millions of people. To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor, we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true. National unity is now returning to America, and confidence and pride is soaring like never before. In everything we do, my administration will be inspired by a strong pursuit of excellence and unrelenting success. We will not forget our country. We will not forget our Constitution. And we will not forget our God. Can't do that. Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release, and I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions, and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it. We will bring prices down, fill our strategic reserves up again, right to the top, and export American energy all over the world. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago. And thank you to the auto workers of our nation for your inspiring vote of confidence. We did tremendously with their vote. I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before to restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government. My administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America. Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents. Something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. And we are going to bring law and order back to our cities. This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay. And I will sign an order to stop our warriors from being subjected to radical political theories and social experiments while on duty. It's going to end immediately. Our armed forces will be freed to focus on their sole mission, defeating America's enemies. Like in 2017, we will again build the strongest military the world has ever seen. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. I'm pleased to say that as of yesterday, one day before I assumed office, the hostages in the Middle East are coming back home to their families. Thank you. America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, inspiring the awe and admiration of the entire world. A short time from now, we are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and we will restore the name of a great president, William McKinley, to Mount McKinley, where it should be and where it belongs. President McKinley made our country very rich through tariffs and through talent. He was a natural businessman and gave Teddy Roosevelt the money for many of the great things he did, including the Panama Canal, which has foolishly been given to the country of Panama after the United States. The United States, I mean, think of this, spent more money than ever spent on a project before and lost 38,000 lives in the building of the Panama Canal. We have been treated very badly from this foolish gift that should have never been made, and Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. Above all, my message to Americans today is that it is time for us to once again act with courage, vigor, and the vitality of history's greatest civilization. So as we liberate our nation, we will lead it to new heights of victory and success. We will not be deterred. Together we will end the chronic disease epidemic and keep our children safe, healthy, and disease-free. The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. Ambition is the lifeblood of a great nation. And right now, our nation is more ambitious than any other. There's no nation like our nation. Americans are explorers, builders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and pioneers. The spirit of the frontier is written into our hearts. The call of the next great adventure resounds from within our souls. Our American ancestors turned a small group of colonies on the edge of a vast continent into a mighty republic of the most extraordinary citizens on earth. No one comes close. Americans pushed thousands of miles through a rugged land of untamed wilderness. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, braved untold dangers, won the Wild West, ended slavery, rescued millions from tyranny, lifted billions from poverty, harnessed electricity, split the atom, launched mankind into the heavens, and put the universe of human knowledge into the palm of the human hand. If we work together, there is nothing we cannot do and no dream we cannot achieve. Many people thought it was impossible for me to stage such a historic political comeback. But as you see today, here I am. The American people have spoken. I stand before you now as proof that you should never believe that something is impossible to do. In America, the impossible is what we do best. From New York to Los Angeles, from Philadelphia to Phoenix, from Chicago to Miami, from Houston to right here in Washington, D.C., our country was forged and built by the generations of patriots who gave everything they had for our rights and for our freedom. They were farmers and soldiers, cowboys and factory workers, steel workers and coal miners, police officers and pioneers who pushed onward, marched forward, and let no obstacle defeat their spirit or their pride. Together they laid down the railroads, raised up the skyscrapers, built great highways, won 2 world wars, defeated fascism and communism, and triumphed over every single challenge that they faced. After all we have been through together, we stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in American history. With your help, we will restore America's promise, and we will rebuild the nation that we love, and we love it so much. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So to every parent who dreams for their child, and every child who dreams for their future, I am with you, I will fight for you, and I will win for you. We're going to win like never before. In recent years, our nation has suffered greatly. but we are going to bring it back and make it great again, greater than ever before. We will be a nation like no other, full of compassion, courage, and exceptionalism. Our power will stop all wars and bring a new spirit of unity to a world that has been angry, violent, and totally unpredictable. America will be respected again and admired again, including by people of religion, faith, and goodwill. We will be prosperous. We will be proud. We will be strong, and we will win like never before. We will not be conquered. We will not be intimidated. We will not be broken, and we will not fail. From this day on, the United States of America will be a free, sovereign, and independent nation. We will stand bravely. We will live proudly. We will dream boldly. And nothing will stand in our way because we are Americans. The future is ours, and our golden age has just begun. Thank you. God bless America. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Burst into flame.
I should tell you, I should just add in here for you folks at home that this reference to taking back control of the Panama Canal, well, quick out of the gate, the Panamanian president said, no, Panama Canal's administration will continue to be under Panamanian control with permanent neutrality. That Panama has administered the canal responsibility for world and trade, including the United States. That's not going to change. We'll see. We'll see.
I think like the funny thing about him and the Panama Canal is like this is going to be one like the start of just like an array of nonsense that he says that's like strategic but also like just bombastic for the sake of being bombastic, like taking a market demand and then trying to either resist it by using bombastic rhetoric or make like a path towards it, like the negotiation for it being easier by using this bombastic language. And, you know, I think I can give two examples of this, but the first one, obviously this idea that China is operating with the Panama Canal, like, I think Trump's brain operates in like a place where every foreign investment by China is like some secret plot to conquer the world. And I feel like this type of rhetoric really outdoes itself, because the reality is that Panama has controlled the canal since 1999, but that is, I guess, too boring for him. Instead, we're getting this Cold War fan fiction about China turning the canal into some kind of Bond villain-like lair. So, you know, sure, why not? But the funniest part about this claim is how, like, perfectly it reflects the classic American empire insecurity about no longer being, you know, the global hall monitor. For, you know, decades, the U.S. has treated the Panama Canal like its personal toll booth. You know, we dug it, we controlled it, and when Panama wanted it back, we acted like they were ungrateful for our colonial charity. Now, as Trump thinks, like, Panama has the nerve to manage their own trade routes, and the horrible thought of letting Chinese companies invest in their infrastructure. Like, clearly to Trump, this is some type of act of war. And I think that Trump and his buddies can't really stand what China, especially how, in a way that it's like China is just doing what the U.S. has done for centuries, just without invasions. Like, Hutchinson Ports runs a couple of terminals, you know, Landbridge Group bought a port, you know, oh no, foreign trade. It's almost like Panama, a sovereign country, is making deals to improve their economy, which I guess to Trump is scandalous. But because those deals involve China, it suddenly becomes a part of some shadowy master plan. Never mind that China isn't operating the canal and doesn't control a single lock, you know, but for Trump, details like actual facts don't get in the way of a good fear-mongering session. And again, don't skip the U.S. history here. For years, the U.S. ran the Panama Canal like it was its own backyard pool. When Panama asked for it back, the U.S. grumbled and acted like it was charity work to return something that they basically stole in the first place. Now Trump is out here accusing China of like imperial overreach. It's like this guy who, ruined every house party complaining when someone else throws one. It's very much classic projection. The real issue here isn't Chinese investment. It's that it's the U.S. and their instability to handle not being the only game in town anymore. I think China's Belt and Road Initiative has many countries lining up to build ports, railways, and, superhighways, actual infrastructure, not just military bases and depth traps like the U.S. is doing globally. So, the U.S. offers like lectures about freedom and drone strikes and a bad trade deal. If you're a small country, what offer sounds better? Of course, this claim about Trump's, threats towards the Panama Canal, it's not about Panama, it's not about the canal. It's about stoking a trade war with China. And, if you convince enough people that China is out there gobbling up the world's main core trade routes, you can justify anything: sanctions, tariffs, maybe even another proxy war. And that's the end game here, is to keep the American empire relevant and keep the threat chugging along by framing every foreign investment as some type of threat to American power. And obviously the irony, of course, here is that this approach only really pushes countries closer to China. So great work, Trump. And so here we are. I think Trump yelling about the canal, Panama rolling its eyes, and China quietly building bridges, both literally and figuratively, while the U.S. is still stuck in the same old playbook, too scared of a multipolar global power system to really figure out how to compete in it. So that's what I think that is all about.
Having Chesapeake crab cakes, Greater Omaha Angus steaks, wine from Monticello, and Napa Valley. So, but I suppose that's what makes in this era The Art of the Deal, Donald Trump's book, not a business book, but a political book. Because there's a political manual for this era, possibly, because there's a whole chapter in it about how one very important strategy in business is to take something that was never on the table, that was a decided matter, and suddenly raise it from the dead again as an open, active file, and poke at that as a way of using it as leverage to get something else. So you don't, in the end, you don't get that, but you get those other things that you really wanted at the beginning
that you knew
of
all
the day.
along.
That's right. Art of the Deal.
Art of the Deal.
Maybe time to read it again.
I think that because of what they just said, like that Art of the Deal thing, I think that Trump's presidency is, in the most ironic twist imaginable, is going to make him actually a figure for peace. Not because he actually wants to be, but because of both his incompetence, his self-interest, and his craving for validation among his peers. And I think all of that will derail American imperialism in ways that the other option could not, or anybody else, any other buddy who was president historically has ever done. He doesn't have the intelligence or ideology to be a competent imperialist. And I think that unintentionally makes the world slightly less dangerous. And I think the first thing to understand about Trump is that he's not a strategic thinker. He doesn't care about long-term goals for like American hegemony or the ideological framework of liberal imperialism. He cares about himself, his image, his legacy, and being seen as a winner. That's why he ended up doing things like meeting directly with Kim Jong-un. It wasn't because he had a vision for denuclearization or peace in the Korean Peninsula. It's because he wanted to look like the first guy to do something big and flashy with a historical enemy. And guess what? He did it and it worked. And Democrats and Republicans alike would never touch something like that because they're too committed to the rules of American foreign policy. And that's the thing, is that Trump doesn't know the rules, and even if he does, he just simply doesn't abide by them. The second thing is that Trump's inability to build any type of functional team is a feature, not a bug, right? Like I've said a million times, that I've heard other people say, is that Trump likes to take his pigs from the market and bring them to slaughter. He's alienated John Bolton, Dick Cheney, those types of the neocons of the world, the people who make American imperialism effective for the most part.
Why are we helping some of the people? Why are we helping Liz Cheney? I mean, Liz Cheney is a disaster. She's a crying lunatic and crying Adam Kinzinger. He's a super crying. I never saw the guy not crying. He's always crying. I looked at him. I remember years ago he was actually on my side. And then one day, when you don't want to kill people in wars, they turn against you. Liz Cheney hated the concept of not going to war with everybody. Let's kill everybody. Let's spend a lot of money on military equipment, where her father works, right? But what she did was incredible. Think of it.
His first term was basically a revolving door of half-competent sycophants and absolute political hacks and clowns, and I feel like that's probably going to happen again to a much accelerated degree because he has nothing to lose this time around. And I think that dysfunction weakens the machinery of U.S. power at home and abroad. Instead of a unified imperial strategy, you get chaos, trade wars with China that hurt America more than they hurt China, abrupt troop withdrawals or troop deployments that leave the U.S. and their allies scrambling militarily, and failed attempts at long-term strong-arming long-term countries into submission. I think that all of those things are bad for the U.S., and when you look at it in comparison to like the rest of the world, I think it's a reprieve from the kind of cold, calculated, liberal imperial destruction that you would see under someone like Kamala Harris. Trump's narcissism also works against the efficiency of American imperialism because he wants to be admired by the world's big men, Putin, Xi, Kim Jong-un, not out of respect, but because he wants to see himself in their ranks. And that's why he's willing to go off script and do things that no other American president would, like considering lifting the Cuban blockade. And if someone, stroked his ego enough, they would, right? Like, he doesn't see foreign policy as a tool for maintaining global dominance. He sees it as a stage where he can get applause and where he can leave a legacy on history. And that makes him very unpredictable, which is terrible for U.S. allies and institutions that rely on the stability of liberal imperialism and its goals. And so I think the real danger isn't Trump, it's a competent administration. And I feel like a Harris presidency would have brought back the neocon liberal interventionist all-stars, the people who know how to execute American dominance with brutal efficiency, while Trump, on the other hand, is just like a bull in a china shop, for lack of a better term. He's going to break things. He's going to alienate allies. He's going to make very dumb moves that are going to undermine U.S. power. And all of this is not in any way an endorsement or argument for Trump, but it's a grim material reality. His incompetence might accidentally open up cracks in American imperialism that no one else would dare to create. So, yeah. I will say this, though, just because I don't want to sound like a hopeless optimist, but I think, now that Trump is back in office, I think that this second term, obviously, I think that the fact that they had a full-on, like Zionist rabbi was the next person to speak after Trump during his inauguration really speaks to the disaster that Trump's second term is shaping up to be for Palestinians.
Let us pray. Almighty God, your prophet Jeremiah walked the streets of Jerusalem and blessed its inhabitants with the Hebrew words, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach BaHashem. Blessed is the one who trusts in God. Thousands of years later, this great nation, which adopted these words as its motto, "In God we trust," stands at a moment of historic opportunity. Americans are searching for meaning. Our merciful Father, help us rise to meet this moment. Bless President Donald J. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance with the strength and courage to choose the right and the good. Unite us around our foundational biblical values of life and liberty, of service and sacrifice, and especially of faith and morality, which George Washington called the indispensable supports of American prosperity. Guide our schools and college campuses, which have been experiencing such unrest, to inspire the next generation, to pair progress with purpose, knowledge with wisdom, and truth with virtue.
It's very fitting that they would get this Zionist freak to speak immediately after Trump,
whose pain our president so acutely feels. We are so thankful for the 3 young women who yesterday returned home, and pray that the next 4 years brings peace to Israel and throughout the Middle East. Almighty God, grant all Americans the opportunity to realize our shared dream of a life filled with peace and plenty,
of settler colonialism,
health and happiness, compassion and contribution. Stir within us the confidence to rise to this moment. For while we trust in God, God's trust is in us, the American people. America is called to greatness, to be a beacon of light and a mover of history. May our nation merit the fulfillment of Jeremiah's blessing, that like a tree planted by water, we shall not cease to bear fruit. May all of humanity experience your love and your blessing. May it be thy will, and let us say, Amen.
And obviously this isn't surprising. His first presidency was basically a 4-year love letter to Netanyahu and his vision to Israel as an expansionist apartheid state. But now, with no concern for re-election and no real accountability, I think Trump's return signals the green light for Israel to take things even further. If his first term was about, setting the table for unchecked Israeli aggression, this term is going to be like a full course meal. During his first presidency, he made a decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and his support for illegal settlements in the West Bank, they weren't just symbolic, they were declarations of impunity. He handed Israel a blank check to continue annexing Palestinian land and crushing any chance of self-determination. That blank check really hasn't bounced, and now it's even bigger than ever. In Trump's mind, this is a win-win situation. He gets to play the historic deal maker while outsourcing any type of moral political fallout to Palestinians and to the neighboring Arab states and human rights organizations that he doesn't really care about. The problem is that it isn't just about Trump being ignorant or indifferent. It's that his administration operates on a pure power is its own justification playbook. Because, the U.S. is supposed to act as a check on Israel, at least in theory, but I feel like Trump's administration is going to skip that part entirely. They will likely rubber stamp any policy, no matter how violent or destabilizing military operations in Gaza, more bombings, more blockades, more suffering. It's all fine as long as Netanyahu and whoever really is in charge is going to keep the talking points clean enough for, the media pundits and the Fox News segments, etc. I feel like Trump's second term is going to also mark the complete dismantling of a lot of Palestinian support systems. His first term, he cut the funding to UNRWA, the UN agency that has been a lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees. Now it looks like he's ready to basically finish that job. No health care, no education, no food assistance. It's all part of basically the same strategy, make life so unlivable for Palestinians that they have no choice but to leave and accept whatever crumbs they're given under Israeli control. And let's not forget that this extends to undermining the Palestinian Authority itself entirely, whether through direct funding cuts or tacit support for Israeli crackdowns. Trump is ensuring that there is no political or organizational resistance left to speak of. Then there's, the so-called peace agenda. Trump's legacy, the Abraham Accords, really did nothing to address the core issues of occupation or systemic oppression. Instead, it normalized relations between Israel and the Arab states while cutting Palestinians out of the conversation entirely. His second term is probably going to be all about doubling down on this, expanding those accords and sidelining Palestinian concerns even further. I feel like for Trump, it's going to all be about the photo ops, the big signatures, the ego boosts. That's going to come with peacemaker. Never mind that these deals only reinforce Israel's dominance. So the thing that I said about him being a peacemaker is not mutually exclusive to what I'm saying here, because the worst part is how this fits into a broader bipartisan framework. Biden's administration funded and armed Israel too, but at least they paid lip service to diplomacy and restraint. Trump doesn't really, he's not going to bother with that at all. His administration mostly embodies the most naked, cynical form of U.S. imperialism, one that sees human rights violations as irrelevant as long as the deals keep coming and the military aid keeps flowing. It's different than liberal imperialism. It's strong imperialism. But I will say, as I said before, Trump's incompetence and ego is going to create a type of chaos in other areas. So, when it comes to Israel, his actions are very much likely going to be horrifyingly consistent when places like Ukraine and other regions where there is conflict, likely not the same. But he is not going to be undermining American imperialism here. May do it at other places. He's going to supercharge it in Israel. And so, his second term is a disaster for anyone who value justice, accountability, and human decency for Palestinians. And so, it's not just another chapter in a very long history of suffering. It's going to be a full-on escalation with Trump gleefully cheering from the sidelines. Whatever the blowback, though, of that is to be determined. So I don't know if it's going to be as dark as I am describing it, but I think there's a chance of it being dark and then there being a blowback to it that will have ramifications. Anyways.
Next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
I want to spin you around to give you a sense of what I'm seeing out here now outside the Capitol Arena, and I'm just going to turn you around because I found a couple of women here who are trying to get inside the arena, and they traveled to Washington, D.C. First, how do you feel? Are you a little bit disappointed that things did not go as planned?
We were here yesterday also, and we got to go to the arena and hear President Trump speak. And so that, thrills us right there. And then just being here for this, even though we didn't get inside, we were watching it on our phones and then watching the Jumbotron. And so we still got to hear it and be a part of it and feel the excitement and be a part of history being made.
So tell me a little bit about watching that speech, because I was inside a bar, got some real-time reactions. Some people had tears in their eyes, loudly cheering. What was some of your reaction to what he was saying, and what stood out the most for you?
Great. We loved hearing it, everything he was saying, and it was a great speech to hear him say everything right there and all of the things that he's going to be changing and doing, even starting immediately. The crowd was cheering, and we were all just like singing, and we sang lots of different things, the national anthem. We did lots of different cheers while we were standing in the crowd, but during watching him speak on the Jumbotron and on our phones, we were able to see all of it, and it was just really great, really fun to hear all of the crowd and all of the enthusiasm that we all had.
And let me ask you, I think the general consensus is that it was a subdued version of Trump, but there were certainly lines in there that was a signature of his style. What did you think when he said he was going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America?
I think it's very appropriate. I'm all for it. I think it's great. And the thing that stood out the most was where he said, "God saved me to save America."
So tell me about that. People seemed quite taken by that particular line. There was a standing ovation for him in that room that I was in. Why did that resonate with you?
Because he is going to save America. So we're just really thrilled that he's going to be leading us going forward for 4 years. And it is like he's actually saving us. So God saved him from everything that's been going on with him, and so that he can come save America for us for 4 years.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for your time. I hope you find a warm place to spend the rest of your day. And Adrian, they are going to be celebrating. The mood is jubilant, it's victorious. They're very happy for their guy.
All right, Chris Reyes. Thanks very much, Chris. So as we watch the lunch beginning, the inaugural lunch, we are joined here on set atop the Canadian Embassy by Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith. You have gloves on, I'm glad, because it's super cold.
It's a little chilly out here. Nice to see you both.
And what's the political temperature like today? Because I know you've been really busy. You've had a busy few days. You have a few more busy days. Yeah. Americans are busy. So who are you able to get FaceTime with? What are these conversations?
So I've been making sure that we put the Canadian interests front and center, talking about how we have a wonderful mutual trade relationship that's mostly tariff-free, and I hope that we can keep it that way. And I was pleased to see with the speech today that clearly the president likes tariffs. He thinks that they're a policy solution, but he's given Canada a reprieve. We'll see how long that lasts for. But I think it's a demonstration that the president recognizes that it's a complicated and delicate relationship between Canada because there's so much cross-border flow of goods, and we have a real opportunity to show how the Americans benefit from that trade relationship.
So you tweeted something interesting today, calling on Ottawa to announce, I want to make sure I get this right, a major acceleration of the 2% target of GDP for defense. Why that? Why now? What has led you to focus on that in your tweet right now?
I've been trying to get to the bottom of why the U.S. president keeps saying that America is subsidizing Canada. And one of the arguments that he makes is the trade deficit. But my argument to that is if you take energy out of the picture, we actually buy more U.S. goods and services than they buy from us. So we actually are the ones with the deficit. And I think we can make that argument. I think we can also make an argument about how our discounted energy gets value added in the U.S. and then it gets exported internationally, and they benefit from that too. And so I think we can make the trade deficit argument. What keeps coming up is that we're not meeting our NATO commitment, we're not meeting our defense spending, that the Americans believe that we're free riding on the security that they provide. And they've made that point since Donald Trump was in office the first time. And so you've seen all of the premiers. We have repeatedly at our joint conferences asked for the federal government to take that 2% target seriously. And I think we have to if we're going to avoid any future trade actions.
When you said it keeps coming up, I mean, we all heard you say that when you went to Mar-a-Lago, you had constructive conversations. But what exactly did you talk about?
I keep talking with officials, and one of the things that does keep coming, the world's a dangerous place. You can see that. The first action he took today was to declare a state of emergency at the southern border. We certainly do not want to see the same kind of action taken at the northern border. We want to make sure that the Americans have confidence in our law enforcement, that we're stopping the illegal flow of drugs, people, human trafficking. And more importantly as well, we also see that the conversation around international security and how we can be a partner. When he talks about Panama and he talks about Greenland, he's demonstrating that he's concerned about the global threat that maybe China poses or maybe Russia poses. And he wants Canada to be a partner in that. So those are the reasons why I think those issues keep coming up.
But what exactly did he say to you in Mar-a-Lago?
Well, I would say that what I asked the president was, do you want to buy more oil and gas from Canada? And he said yes. And I think that that's a common ground to start from, because I know that what is happening there is the Americans see that global energy dominance is the way for them to not only provide a low cost of living for their own people, but also to be able to provide support for their friends and allies internationally so that they're not dependent on hostile partners. So I think we have to take the president seriously, but we have to understand the underlying message of what he's talking about. The world's a dangerous place. He wants us to be a partner. There's a way that we can be a partner, and that's what we have to be focusing on for the common ground.
So I can understand you saying when you said, do you want to buy more oil and gas from Canada? He says yes. But then today he declares an energy emergency, or he's about to. What does that mean for Alberta? What does that mean for Canada?
Well, the Americans consume about 21 million barrels a day of oil. They produce about 13 million barrels a day. They have to find the extra from somewhere else. And their refineries are special purpose to be able to accept a heavier grade of oil. They can only get that from a few places in the world. They can get it from Venezuela, they can get it from Iran, they can get it from Iraq, or they can get it from us. And so I think we have an opportunity, knowing that the Americans do want to be able to exert themselves internationally as an energy superpower. We have the ability to provide the backfill for that so that their people are still able to enjoy lower energy prices, and that's a double win. So what I would like to see is for us to have some projects on the table that we can propose. How can we build more pipelines to the U.S.? How can we build more pipelines to the east so that we can help our international partners? How can we build more pipelines to the west so that we can help our Asia-Pacific partners? If we want to be demonstrating that we want to be a partner with the Americans on energy security, I think that that's a good place to start from.
So as you were talking and
There's
talking
that
to a whole group of
false
people,
scarcity on oil.
Premier Ford was tweeting that the tariffs are coming. Make no mistake about it, he's coming for us. He said, is it tomorrow? Is it a month down the road? He said the remarks are very concerning and that his number one goal is to take business off other countries. He says specifically Ontario. Are you as worried as Premier Ford?
I think that we have a really strong argument to make. I think that Canada and the U.S. have jointly been harmed by having a lot of that business move to Mexico with a lot of Chinese investment. That also comes up in conversations, and we've got to make sure that we've got a fair trade relationship with our Mexican partner as well. But whether it's oil and gas, whether it's auto parts, whether it is germanium as a critical mineral from BC or uranium as a critical element from Saskatchewan, every single jurisdiction in Canada has an excellent value proposition for the U.S. I think we lead with strength. I think that we now have an opportunity to have those constructive conversations because we didn't see a day one tariff. And I'm optimistic that as we build the relationships, meet the Americans where they are, help to support their international goals, I think we can maintain that relationship. I take a different approach. Let's stop fighting with each other. Let's maybe try to remove some of the internal trade barriers. Maybe my fellow premiers can stop blocking pipelines when we propose them to either the west or east coast. And maybe this should be a moment of reckoning for us as a country, that part of the reason all of us look north-south is because for the years have made it very difficult to do business east-west. So maybe that's what we should be talking about.
But somewhere there is a playbook about what to do if the conversation has to happen tomorrow. And if the conversation comes down to a potential export tariff or a ban from Canada, from Ottawa, what's in your playbook?
Well, my playbook is to talk with the incoming Secretary of the Interior and the incoming Secretary of Energy and ask if they want to double our oil and gas production and double our oil and gas export. That's where I'm going next. I believe that we should be talking about how we sell more to America, not less, and that we should be talking to America about how we can buy more from them too. If they really are concerned that we're not buying enough, well then let's buy more gas turbines, let's buy more AI infrastructure, let's buy more military equipment. This is the constructive conversation that we need to have, and I think we need to stop with the threats and start talking about diplomacy and collaboration, because that's where we're going to find a solution.
Okay, Premier Smith.
I find it very the way that she talks is very fucked. Like, she has a very weird cadence in her tone of speaking that is very unnerving. Daniel Smith.
Not meeting its NATO target of 2%. Wab Kinew from Manitoba has been pushing that notion as well. So it's interesting that the Premier Smith is now saying it. Comes on the same day, I should say, that the new Secretary General, relatively new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has said that NATO will be increasing its spending to respond to some of the requests from Donald Trump.
I am, you know I am the one that works
First of all, I think that this 25% on tariffs against Canada, very cartoonish threat. I think that it's a type of move that is really just like a blustery move that perfectly encapsulates Trump's presidency and what it's going to mean going forward. A mix of performative machismo and economic illiteracy that are going to have real world consequences. And I think the fallout for Canada, particularly in Ontario, is massive. Ford is panicking. He estimates that the tariffs could cost like 500,000 jobs in Ontario alone, a number that's so high that it could obviously tank the province's economy, and it would send shockwaves throughout the rest of Canada. And then his response is this greatest hits album of nationalist chest thumping and outright bad ideas, which to his credit does capture the stakes, even if it doesn't really offer any type of solution. Ford really calling for this Team Canada approach to counter Trump's bluster, which sounds nice, but is really, it's about as actionable as a pep talk before the Titanic hits an iceberg. Like, his retaliatory proposals range from mildly amusing to deeply unserious. Banning U.S. alcohol from LCBO shelves. He's also mentioned withholding energy exports to the U.S., a move that, symbolically satisfying, would probably just accelerate the installation of American solar panels and nuclear reactors throughout North America. Ford has also floated the idea of spending tens of billions of dollars in stimulus to cushion the blow, something that sounds like kind of Keynesian interventionism that he would have mocked as woke socialism a few years ago, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right, Dougie? All this anxiety over Trump's tariffs is basically a reminder of Canada's precarious position. We're economically tied to a neighbor that is so capriciously in its trade policy that it feels like a coin flip, and politically dependent on a federal government that has no real plan beyond hoping Trump gets distracted by some type of other issue. And we're on that topic of desperation. Let's talk about Quebec, because if Trump's chaos has proven anything, it's that reality is just as unhinged for us to consider the impossible as something that will be reality, more likely than not. So what I'm getting at is, we're talking about so much of this balkanization between states and provinces. So there's one province that does have a pathway to their own actual sovereignty, and that is Quebec. And Quebec, working with places like Mexico, could create their own free trade agreement. Quebec could join BRICS, and stop laughing, because I think that that's much not that much more absurd than like Doug Ford banning whiskey. I think Quebec obviously is a province, not a country, but it is also a nation. And BRICS is a bloc for major emerging economies, not regions whose, greatest export is aggressively mediocre alcohol. But this is the thing, hear me out. BRICS is expanded to include countries like Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia. So why not the nation of Quebec? it lacks a population, an economy, and obviously strategic resources to justify its own membership. And yes, it's still technically attached to Canada, that is, a nation that is firmly aligned with Western powers that BRICS exists to oppose. But let's imagine a post-independent Quebec, liberated from Ottawa's colonial yoke, offering hydroelectricity and its, unique French je ne sais pas to this global south. Maybe that's exactly what BRICS needs. A small, scrappy former province ready to shake up the neoliberal order. And I'm only half kidding, so don't take it too seriously. Obviously, realistically, Quebec wouldn't stand a chance. Its economy is a rounding error compared to other BRICS nations. Its geopolitical clout is basically non-existent. But in a world where Doug Ford is proposing a trade war with Kentucky and Trump think tanks will, solve his border woes, can we really dismiss the idea of Quebec becoming a BRICS nation? I'm not going to completely write it off. Maybe Quebec won't join BRICS, but it's a thought experiment that is a reminder that we're just, we're all but playing our small parts in a geopolitical farce chess game, and hoping all that we can hope for is to keep our dignity as any type of sovereign state that is not completely just imposed on by a more hegemonically dominant American empire. I also think that I feel like Trump taking office today is it's not just going to have a shakeup for domestic politics, obviously for global politics as well. It's already sending tremors north of the border. It's been rattling the already teeniest foundations of Canada's federal political landscape. And as I tweeted about earlier, Yves Francois Blanchon, leader of the Bloc Québécois, he posted something that is really a vindication of what people have been saying for years, is that Quebec can't afford to live in the shadow of a unstable American empire. Trump's return is less of a political event and more an unmissable signal that Quebec's future depends on cutting its own path forward. And so Blanchet, his messaging here really hasn't wavered since Trump's first term, and his response this time is very clear. During the inauguration, he tweeted, obviously in French, but I'm translating, "Late conversation, but better late than never. Our message since November. Threats from the U.S. are forcing Quebec and Canada to take beneficial action. Diversification of our markets, Europe, Asia, Latin America, etc. Local transformation of our resources. Increase in productivity through research and innovation. Let's add improve interprovincial trade, act on border security, migrants and drugs, and international security, NATO, without bellicose rhetoric or electoral overbidding." So yeah, this isn't a frantic reaction or an opportunistic pivot. I feel like it's the same tune that Blanchet has been playing all along, since before Trump's election and now after his inauguration. It's just that the urgency has basically now been turned up to 11. Trump's tariffs, a trade war, or this protectionist agenda really makes the bloc's calls for diversified markets and local industry feel less like a nice to have type of thing and more like an economic strategy that is very viable. And I would say don't mistake this tone of Blanchet as naivety. His follow-up tweet after Trump's reelection was diplomatic, sure, but it carried the weight of someone who basically knows the score. And as I've said numerous times, this is absolutely not an endorsement of him as a person, the party's politics in any way, but Blanchet is one of the only savvy political operators in Canadian politics who actually uses the leverage that he has politically. But yeah, after the inauguration speech, he tweeted out, "I wish President Trump every success. Quebec, Canada, Mexico, and the United States are friends, allies, and partners who will, in the weeks and months to come, listen to reason and identify together the opportunities that arise from the challenges we share." So again, this is someone who is like playing chess while everyone else is still arguing about the rule book. Because again, Quebec has the ability to leverage their own nationhood. And he isn't clinging to some hope that cooler heads will prevail. He's setting the stage for Quebec to act decisively in a world that's becoming more and more volatile by the day, in a continuing multipolar geopolitical power structure that is transitioning more and more. And I feel like the Bloc's platform, diversifying trade beyond the U.S., investing in local resource transformation, fostering innovation, it's gone from forward-looking ideas to a necessary shield against an American empire that's becoming openly hostile to anything resembling multinational cooperation. And again, let's not forget the border, migration, drug trafficking, international security. Again, not abstract policy points anymore. These are issues that need, for them, immediate concrete action. And Blanchet's really the only leader that is framing them such without resorting to panic or empty bluster that we've come to expect from many of the Federalist parties. So Canada, meanwhile, is barreling towards its 2025 federal election in a fractured, chaotic political landscape. The Liberals currently are a shadow of them former selves as a political force. They're stumbling through the aftermath of Justin Trudeau's resignation and trying to get a new leader to face Pierre Poilievre, and whose Conservatives are basically what most people think, cruising towards what looks like a inevitable majority. But where that leaves the Bloc as, you know, one of the very last credible alternatives, especially for Quebecers, right, they see the writing on the wall. Ottawa isn't going to save them from what's coming, so they'll have to do it themselves. Again, this isn't me, what I believe. I'm just saying that this is how the political dynamic is going to shake out. Blanchet's pitch here is basically simple, but very cutting if you're watching as like a politically observant person living in Quebec. Quebec's interests are best served by a person who is thinking of a self-reliant strategy. And that is going to sway a ton of people towards the Bloc Québécois in the next federal election, which again is going to change the dynamic of that election massively. And I don't think the polls are accounting for that in any way. So as Trump's second term is going to reignite all of these old debates on sovereignty, borders, and alliances, the Bloc's message has never been more relevant. And so this isn't just about policy, it's about survival. It's about Quebec realizing that the world isn't going to get any easier to navigate, and deciding, you know, it's time to be real here. Stop hoping for stability among unreliable neighbors and carve out its own future. Again, I'm not saying this isn't my belief, but I'm just like laying out the political belief of this building coalition that is going to grow even more in the face of this increasingly hostile rhetoric coming from Trump. So that is something that is to come. Another thing that I will say, though, as well, is that I think like Blanchet's post and his tweet shows like a beneath like what is a very pragmatic surface lies like a revealing commentary on how capitalism needs to adapt to exploit what is ongoing geopolitical uncertainty. He highlights several key economic actions: market diversification, local resource transformation, boosting productivity through innovation. At first glance, these proposals appear to be straightforward responses to Trump's rhetoric and policies, such as his potential tariffs on aggressive renegotiations of trade agreements. Yet, the underlying motives reflect the priorities of capital forces seeking to hedge their risks in a destabilized global capitalist order. Trump's this America First policy, is characterized by protectionism and a disregard for traditional trade alliances. It really threatens the profit margins of corporations who are reliant on cross-border trade in these stable markets. Blanchet's call here for diversification, seeking trade relationships with Europe and Asia and Latin America, it aligns with these interests, aiming to mitigate dependency on this volatile U.S. economy. And I feel like the emphasis on the local transformation of resources reflects very much a shift in how capital positions itself under this new economic nationalism. Exporting raw materials for foreign processing has long been a staple of Canada's economic model, but Trump's policies would impose significant barriers to that type of system. By advocating for local processing, his supposed interest here aligns with the interests of domestic industry that stands to benefit from keeping value-added production within Quebec and Canada. And again, obviously, Ford could be saying that, but that imposes capital forces that he's not willing to impose, because he Ontario doesn't have the same power as Quebec. So Blanchet and the Bloc are implementing this strategy that not only insulates the economy from external shocks, but it also aligns with a long-term profit incentive domestic capitalists who will turn to a developmentalist strategy because Quebec has a path towards their own independence. And again, this might sound silly, but that is the political recourse. And that is why it shakes out. That is why he can say what other people can't say, and it's going to work, and it's going to change the dynamic of the election in a way that is not fully anticipated. So again, his reference here to increasing productivity through research and innovation, again, it further illustrates how capital forces are going to respond to these geopolitical shifts. Investment in innovation, it's not merely a nod to economic modernization. It represents an attempt to maintain competitiveness in a global market where U.S.ism is going to threaten traditional avenues of trade. For capital, productivity gains a means of maintaining profitability even as access to U.S. markets becomes less and less reliable. So the final point that he has is in improving interprovincial trade and enhancing border and international security. I feel like that underscores how capital forces are going to prioritize stability and control, which the thing about this, right? This is what Trump doing with declaring a national emergency at the southern border. What that's going to do is it's going to make it so that it's not going to get rid of migrants, right? It's going to make it so that migrants are going to be willing to work for less and are going to be willing to take less, are going to be willing to have worse conditions to be able to be there. It's creating a false scarcity on a labor market that was already incredibly exploited. So what this will also do, this is something that the market already had a demand for. This is something that capitalist forces were already needed. Trump is creating an avenue for it and using it as a political thing that other politicians would otherwise not be willing to do, because it just goes against as a right winger, it goes against right wing ideology, and in some ways, right, it opens yourself up to be geopolitically vulnerable in a way that other political operators like Harris would not be willing to do. And what this is the thing is by trying to create a new integrated economy that is going to have open borders between the U.S., Canada, and possibly Mexico, is that it is going to create false scarcity on an already exploited labor market that's going to make people who are not from the U.S. or Canada more willing to take more precarious conditions to work for less, right? And then what it's also going to do, because of that, And because of opening the border, it's going to eliminate a whole bunch of the mechanisms that make the US dollar about 19% stronger than the Canadian dollar. Those mechanisms are going to dissolve because the border is what does that. And so the Canadian dollar is going to get about, not, I wouldn't say totally at par, but almost at par. And that's going to then incentivize a Canadian investment into the US market that would have otherwise not done it because of that border, and because the US is going to have a new labor market that is operating in false scarcity in a already exploited group of people who are going to be willing to work in greater precarious conditions. It's also going to make it so that those people are going to be willing to come to Canada, right, and work in more precarious conditions. And then what does that solve? It solves the current problem, that is the immigration problem. And I'm not saying that that's actually a problem. I'm saying that that's like the talking point, right? The talking point of the problem of immigration is going to be solved by opening up the borders, creating a new open border policy that's going to make it so that there's going to be more people who are going to be willing to work for less, who are from the global south, who are from Central America, stuff like that. They're going to be willing to be more invisible, work in more precarious conditions. They're going to be willing to also, like, if think about what they do with PR people, like people who have temporary residence and things like that. They're going to increase that so that people who are temporary residents are not going to have the same type of rights as citizens. And so that there'll be more and more people who will be willing to submit to that, because then there'll be more and more of a demand to get into these markets that are opening up, come work in Canada and things like that. But they'll be given this status of a temporary migrant resident. And by giving them that status, they are then subjected to the state, right? They are then known by the state, which they otherwise would have wanted to avoid. And two, they are then subjected to the state as a certain status that is undermined, like by like that status makes it so that they are being able to be exploited in a way that citizens are not. And that is how they are going to be able to integrate the economies between the three north, like the 2.5 global north nations in the US, Canada, and Mexico. Obviously, I think Greenland has a part to do with this as well. They're going to integrate these economies in a way that's going to make it so that they'll be more tenable for international investment and to stave off the coming like multipolar global capitalist shift that is making America less and less relevant on a geopolitical stage as far as global capitalism goes. This is the market adapting to the forces that are demanding the adaptation to happen. And this is why Trump is, in the most ironic way possible, good, because he's willing to say those things and to embody those demands that other countries wouldn't, like other leaders wouldn't be willing to demand. And because those leaders are willing to use brute force, Trump wants to make a deal rather than use brute force. So this type of bombastic rhetoric is actually him just negotiating rather than, I'm obviously speaking in hyperbole here, but rather than fucking drone strikes, So that's essentially what I'm saying here. And I feel like Blanchet's tweet really pulls the curtain back, because those demands, those market forces were there way before Trump. It's just that no one was willing to talk about it. This is the thing that the American economy needed to do to be able to stay relevant. The thing that Blanchet said about strengthening these interprovincial trade agreements, really, that is what they want to, is to reduce dependency on international markets by accelerating interprovincial trade, which also includes some states in the U.S. who may be willing to be a part of this trade agreement. It also possibly includes Mexico. So, this is all happening. The U.S. is going to try to clamp down hard on border security because, the stated concern of the overflow of exploited labor is actually to create increased scarcity on that labor so that those people are more willing to work in more precarious conditions. And it's those measures could disrupt like economic stability if it went too far. This is the market adapting to that. And that's the thing, is because capitalism doesn't want instability. It needs predictability. And those measures that Trump is talking about, even under the guise of harsh rhetoric, really are him trying to embody a moment that other political figures would not be willing to embody, because it is antithetical to American empire, because America has always wanted to keep the treats to itself. Now it needs to expand to include resources from other places. So it's going to be this like soft imperialism, right? He even said external revenue agency is what he talked about. That's essentially like what it is doing this like backwards imperialism. And that's the thing, is that these measures will be aimed to control an environment that is going to become more and more chaotic, which, and it's going to be to create the conditions that profit making can continue to be unimpeded by market forces. And Blanchet's tweet obviously is framed in very pragmatic language. It still reveals how market forces in Quebec and Canada are going to need to recalibrate to respond to Trump's return to power, and that, the measures that he is proposing are not solely about protecting Quebec's autonomy or ensuring, economic fairness. They are about preserving and redirecting capitalist flows under what is a new geopolitical global capitalist reality that the market is demanding. And it really pulls the curtain back and shows that this was something that was coming with or without Trump being in power. It's just that Trump is more willing to embody it than other forces were. So Trump's presidency really exposes those vulnerabilities of global capitalism in the West. And Blanchet's post really provides like a glimpse into how those economic forces are going to adapt and thrive amidst the ongoing chaos. So yeah, I think if anything, this is going to help Quebec in numerous ways, because it's going to give Quebec the political leverage to move in a way that they haven't been able to previously because of the blowback. Yeah, I think that the Bloc is going to see a massive increase. Whether I agree with them politically, it will empower Quebec as a province. And I also think that it's going to put a demand on the province that has been needed for a long time. Yes, for better and worse, there is going to be a harsh position of anti-immigration, but then there's going to be an intense backlash in places like Montreal. The backlash will actually push the Overton window further left. I think Legault is going to get crushed in the 2026 election. And I also think that if the Bloc has a strong performance in 2025, they're not in line with the CAC, and it's going to hurt Legault significantly. It's the same type of situation where Legault needs to win a majority, because if he doesn't win a majority and it's a minority, they will form a coalition against him. I don't think Legault wins a minority either, but that's what he has to do. He has to run to win a majority, or else he'll lose, because the other parties will be willing to push him out. And then also, there's going to now be a Liberal Party of Quebec, which I don't know if the Quebec Liberal Party will be all that successful. I don't think they'll be all that successful, but what they're going to do is take away that centrist, moderate vote that Legault pretended to be. Legault won because there was a gigantic hole in the center that he took up. And because there was a bunch of left of center and then a bunch of right of center, and he took up the center. But I think that because of the Liberal Party being there, it's going to take votes away from that, which will make it so that it's going to hurt him massively. He's going to be done, and it's going to push Quebec further left, which will then in turn, and this sounds like progressive dreamcasting, but it's true just because of the way that the political dynamic in this country works. Where Quebec goes, Canada goes. I will also say that I moved to Quebec last year. I've only been watching Quebec politics, like observing it from the outside for a very long time. So I don't know it the same way that I know Ontario. But I do know that from observing, I know that Legault is going to get smoked. Like, I'm willing to make that call, at least. I think he's going to get smoked. Just because the backlash of this is going to push. It's not even about how it does it culturally, how it pushes things politically left through the framework of the Westminster system, right? The Liberals have won the last 2 elections by winning 33% of the vote. So that's all, like, if there is just a little bit of a shift in that center-left coalition or center-left block of voters that are not conservative grows just a little bit, it will continue to, it creates this cascading effect where it's like, okay, the conservatives might not be able to form a majority government. Okay, the conservatives might not be able to, okay, the conservatives might not win. And then it becomes that thing where it's in that moment right there where it becomes, what have you done for me lately? And that's where progress comes, where you can dangle the carrot of public support over the heads of political figures. It never comes because they want to give concessions. It comes because they need to do and say. This is where stuff like UBI or extended employment benefits or extended health care, all of that stuff comes from this. When a government that is going to lose if they don't do things, actual material things to get people to vote for them, that's where progress comes from. And that's the moment that we're in. And it wouldn't have happened if Trump wasn't in power. And so maybe it's cope, but I'm saying that there's a lot of positive to take from this as far as like how it's going to affect the Canadian political dynamic, because I feel like so many people, so many political pundits, so many people doing polls, so many people commentating on politics in Canada, they look at it in the framework of the US, like left, right, 2-party system. But like, we do not operate like that. We are a Westminster parliamentary system that has one province that holds, like, there has only been 2 times in history where a leader has won without also winning Quebec, okay? Quebec is like all the swing states combined, okay? So because of the way that it shakes out, you both need to appeal to Quebec, and you both also have to win enough of the vote to hoard off. For the Conservatives, you have to win enough of the vote to hoard off a coalition being built around you. And that there's never been more conditions for that to happen until right now, especially with Trudeau out of power. This is exactly what I was just saying. Quebec puts themselves in an amazingly perfect position because of the political dynamic of you need to win Quebec to win Canada. So it's that, like, what are you going to give us? And Quebec is in that hilarious position because we have a bi-judicial legal system where some stuff provincially we don't have to abide by the Canadian Constitution. See, but that's the thing. If the Tories do badly in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois will, but I have been saying this since 2022. This is what's going to happen. This is my hilarious fantasy booking of what's going to happen. And I've been saying this from the beginning. The Conservatives are going to win a small minority. The Bloc Québécois are going to be leaders of the opposition, and they are going to form a coalition around the Conservatives. But because Blanchet can't be prime minister, it's going to be Carney. So Carney is going to be like a de facto leader of a coalition that will include the Bloc Québécois, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens. And what's going to happen is that the people who voted for the far-right lunatics who voted for Paul Olivier are going to, because they don't understand the Westminster political system, they're going to have a complete freak out, and it's going to be like Convoy 2.0, and it's going to be like the Canadian insurrection attempt. And then that is going to like stain Poilievre. Poilievre is going to have to resign or going to get kicked out of the party. And then Doug Ford will be ushered in as the next leader of the Conservatives. And then they might be able to win because they need to appeal to the Conservatives in Canada always need to appeal to like my dad, someone who votes like someone who likes Ford, votes Ford provincially, but is socially liberal. So in the things that affect him the least, he votes the liberal the most. So federal stuff, he votes liberal. Provincial stuff, he votes conservative. That is the voting base that like Poilievre will never get because he's such a far right fucking loser. And that's the thing. Like a lot of this depends on how Carney distances himself from Trudeau. I think all it needs to be is he needs to say that he is going to be willing to work with other parties to get to because like this is what happened in France, right? In France, they created a Popular Front party that into the election, they pulled all of the, they polled and saw who was leading in each place that could turn the election. And they pulled those other party members. So like, the Green Party pulled their member if they thought that the other left of center candidate had an easier chance of winning. So they don't even need to actually form a coalition. They just need to do the strategic voting thing where they pull each candidate because with the intention to say, if the Conservatives win a minority, we are going to form a coalition around him to make it so that they cannot form government. It's something that happens in like Australia. It happens in so many different Westminster parliamentary systems. It just hasn't happened very much in Canada. It's happened a couple of times, a handful of times, but because of the, Trump causing this wild card situation, like it's making it so that it's similar to what's happened right now, because what's happened right now is the Liberals hold a small minority. So the Conservatives continuously kept voting motions of non-confidence. So that's what forced them to create the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, because then that agreement made it so that the Conservatives can no longer keep making votes of confidence against the Liberal Party. Because of that supply and confidence agreement, they had enough votes. They now had a majority of votes to make it so that the Conservatives couldn't even do a motion of non-confidence. In like September, the NDP pulled that, and then you saw the NDP and the Bloc start saying, like, you're going to give us what we want or we're going to vote non-confidence. Literally, the last day that Parliament was in session, they voted non-confidence. The NDP voted with the Liberals once again. And as soon as Parliament was out of session and there was no way for the election to happen, Jagmeet Singh put out a statement saying that he will vote non-confidence. But he said that when Trudeau was in power. So now, if Carney comes into power, which I'm definitely going to just assume is going to happen, there's no way Freeland is going to win that. Carney comes into power, that might change things. But if it doesn't, let's just say it doesn't. Let's just say that an election does happen, okay? All that needs to happen is that the Conservatives don't win a majority, and then the Conservatives can win most seats. It is pretty likely, but they dropped like 20% in the past like 25 days. They were up massively, and now with the seat projections, it's saying they will win. They have a small chance at a majority. And like before Christmas, it was like a 99% chance at a majority. Now it's like a coin flip. This might be a repeat of Kamala Harris, but with Carney. That's the fatal flaw that I just said that we keep doing when we're looking at this, is that Carney doesn't need to be Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris needed to win 50% or more. Carney just needs to be a part of a group that can hold 33%, because that's all power needs in the Westminster parliamentary system. So like if they are using the strategy that the Democrats used with Kamala to like pull the rug on the previous candidate, distance themselves from that candidate, push a new person to make it as though they lost without losing type thing, I said it when that happened. This would work in Canada easily, but it doesn't work in the US because it's a two-party system. But in Canada, you literally only need 33% to maintain in power. If you look at the last two popular votes, Trudeau only won 32 and 33% of the vote to maintain a small minority. You don't need 50%. You don't need a polarity. You just need a small minority. And that's the thing, is that building up the demand of this anti-Trudeau sentiment and then pulling the plug on him at the last second to then replace him with this candidate at the very moment that this crazy reaction is happening with Trump against the Conservatives because of Trump coming in, it's going to hurt Poilievre just enough that it's going to make this margin that what I'm saying is going to happen is going to happen. And again, I'm not endorsing any of these fucking people, obviously. I'm just commenting on the horse race aspect of it and the way that the political game shakes out. But yeah, that's what's going to happen. And then all that happens is that, and it becomes even crazier because this is what I was saying. Usually it's the leader of the opposition who has the most seats who becomes prime minister when a coalition government is formed, like in Australia, like the party who has the most seats, that person becomes the leader, like becomes the prime minister. But the thing is that with the Bloc, Blanchet can't be prime minister. It's not like, it's literally set up that he can't be prime minister, even if that happens. So Carney could literally become prime minister. I mean, he's going to be prime minister anyways if he wins the Liberal leadership, but he could become prime minister just by holding the Conservatives to less than a majority and then being able to be a part of a coalition that has the second most seats with the Bloc Québécois. And this entire insanity that I just said, this absurdity, is all totally baked into the reality of how our system works. It's not far-fetched at all. And because it's so complicated, people who don't follow politics the way that I just explained it are going to have a fucking freak out when this happens and storm the Parliament building. And then the Conservatives are going to be tarnished. And then what we will see is a new rebranding of Conservatives that will be that progressive Conservative, that, restoration of classic Toryism in Canada, because Poilievre is not a Tory. He's a far-right freak. And then that is when Poilievre will get ousted. Then we'll have Doug Ford, and then Doug Ford will probably, because that coalition is not going to hold together, but it's going to prevent, it's going to be similar to what happened in France. It's going to be the type of thing that is prevented to keep a Le Pen type figure from taking power, like Poilievre. Then it will probably dissolve, and then we'll probably have another election. But at that time, the Conservatives will have rebranded to be a moderate conservative, classic Toryism, like Harper was before. And then that's when we'll get Prime Minister Doug Ford. And I know that that's a mouthful, but like, I've thought about this a lot, and that's what's going to happen. I'm positive. And it's going to be hilarious because it's going to be like that classic Quebec majorité meme, except reality. It's going to happen. They're going to be the cornerstone of a coalition that forms a government around the Conservatives, and it's going to be the most hilarious shit ever.
Team Canada, at your service from the land of the chill. If they can't thrill you, baby, nobody will. Make way, here comes Team Canada.
How hard is it, though, to sell Canadian confidence and strength? You're about to get a new prime minister. There's about to be an election. The whole Team Canada approach has a little crack in it with Alberta.
I feel, especially in the last, handful of days, I feel more buttressed by Team Canada than I felt.
What made the change?
Just the messages that I am getting and the people that are contacting me. I feel that Team Canada, as it relates to actual Canadians, are saying, you know what? Let's make sure we stand up for ourselves. Let's make sure we get a good deal. Of course, we want to be the best partners we can be with the Americans, but let's be sure that we're strong for Canada. I feel that message is coming more strongly to me now than it has up until now. And I truly believe, I'm up on Capitol Hill with President Trump and his supporters. Those people live in Georgia, and they live in South Carolina, and they live in Texas, and they live in Nebraska, and they have relations with Canada. They may work for a company that sells to Canada. They may be employed by a company that is Canadian. They may, travel to Canada. They may own property that is rented to a Canadian. There is so many ways in which we're interconnected. We just need all of us to speak to all of them. And I know that I don't mean for that to sound corny, because it sounds a little corny, but boy, it works. It really does work. And
You're
so,
talking about
a nation of ambassadors. To me, that's what Team Canada is. But I think they're also using tariffs to start other kinds of conversations, right? We saw them use the tariff to start a conversation with us on the border. And I think that's not the end of it. I think, you will have seen it from the president's address, very interested in energy dominance, U.S. energy sort of muscularity at home and on the world stage. Well, they can do that with us, and in fact, they can't do it as well without us. So I think that this is not just a trade discussion. I think this is a partnership discussion around the priorities that the incoming administration will have.
So we remain very much on the job to protect the Canadian economy. If the administration wants to study the economic and trade relationship between Canada and the United States, we think that's a positive opportunity for us to continue to tell the Americans, and obviously Canadians as well, the importance of working together and how both countries are stronger and more secure when we respect and honor a comprehensive free trade agreement. It's in the interest of American consumers and American businesses, but it's also very much in our own economic interest to maintain that partnership with the United States.
It's important for folks to understand, if they're planning on trying to cross the border in between our ports of entry, it is illegal to do so, and it's dangerous to do so. So it's very important for folks to understand that we have a very, very tight cooperation, integration between the RCMP, the CBSA, our provincial counterparts, and our American partners, and we're working hand in glove on this.
When I talk about trade, it's definitely energy, but also critical minerals. We know how much people in his entourage are interested in having access to more energy because of the need for AI to support much more AI development and counter China. We've been clear also that we want to do more when it comes to supporting them around the world and geopolitically. And yes, we're increasing our investment in defense, but at the end of the day, what is at stake is making sure that we save jobs in Canada, make sure that the cost of living is affordable, and that's the same for Americans.
In the tariff fights of the first Trump presidency, he acted kind of unilaterally under the guise of a national economic emergency to hit steel and aluminum. And Canada was able to push back with reciprocal tariffs. Yeah. This time, though, after promising 25% across the board or threatening it, they've now gone to a study, which is a more typical sort of trade action that you see from trade agencies of a national government. I mean, does this suggest to you that they realize the cost? Because he's talking about lowering costs. That was one of his executive orders today. Becoming an energy superpower. Yeah. Tariffs go against all of those things, especially with the nature of the Canadian relationship. The fact that he's moved away from threats to a study, I know it still hangs there. Does that suggest to you some sort of a moderation in how he's approaching this?
Listen, I'm not speculating. It's not my job to do that. At the end of the day, my job is to make sure to lead the efforts of our diplomats in Washington, making sure that we're one team Canada. This should not be a partisan issue. We should all be united, Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, bloc across the country. And if what has been shown in the past few weeks is that President Trump has been able to do what no federal politicians have been able to do over decades, which is unite the country. And so we'll continue to work as one team.
Okay, speaking of federal politics, over this weekend you endorsed Mark Carney for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada. This comes at a critical time of who is going to be the Prime Minister to deal with Donald Trump after he does whatever it is he is going to do. You were in cabinet when Chrystia Freeland had that job last time around. Why do you think Mark Carney is a better choice than Chrystia Freeland for this moment?
Ooh, tough question.
I think we need somebody with strong credentials when it comes to weathering economic crisis, particularly the one that Mark was able to deal with in 2008 when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada, and also afterwards Brexit when he was the governor of the Bank of England. But I must say, David, I have a lot of respect for all three candidates, Chrystia, Karina, and Mark. It was a tough choice. It's difficult because we're one strong family, but of course I wanted to make sure that I would send a signal to my volunteers and to my organizers. And meanwhile, I'll just concentrate on Canada-US and answering all your tough questions. I still think also that we need to have not only a strong economic plan, I think also we need to make sure that we have a strong balance sheet as well.
I mean, Carney helped destroy the British economy by causing the conditions that needed Brexit to happen. And all that he did is create the conditions for basically set it up so that Obama's bailout had like reciprocal effects in Canada that otherwise wouldn't have if Canada didn't do what they do then. Like the same type of stimulus stuff that was granted to corporations in 2008 were granted to Canadian corporations. It's just that it wasn't done in the same way that Obama did it. It was just done by doing the stuff that was already baked into the Bank of Canada's ability to do things. So, and then because of that, it made it so that Obama's stimulus package for these corporations and bailout helped the multinational corporations that were also operating in Canada. So yes, he's not some banker Superman. What he is a neoliberal fixer. That's what he is. And so that's what another aspect of this. It's going to be so funny when like Poilievre is fucking pitching Bitcoin, like a national Bitcoin reserve, and this just all of this pie in the sky technocratic idiocy. And Carney, I'm not endorsing Carney in any way, but his credentials speak for themselves as far as like, you know, people who are going, and I judge things by who's my dad going to vote for. And it's Carney. Like, Poilievre is just an absolute joke. Like, watch how fast this worm turns. I'm telling you, it's going to turn so fast. And Carney and Blanchet, the two of them, because I don't think that Carney is going to be able to appease Quebecers, but it's going to create a split where Quebec is going to have greater power that is going to be granted through this coalition that will be built that is going to defeat Poilievre. And watch how fast it happens, because now that there's no more like a cult of personality of opposition in Trudeau, Blanchet isn't going to be taking shots at other members if they are willing to give Quebec what they want, because it's not in his interest to do that. He wants to build coalition. He has that benefit to do that, unlike everybody else, because he knows he can't win. But what he can do is be the person who will say the things that needs to be said against the opposition, just to be like a center point of opposition. And so this is the thing, is that in Canada, when the Conservatives are in power and the Conservatives don't have someone who appeals to Quebec, it always ends up making the center left united. And in this moment, because of the way that it shakes out, and because like where Quebec goes, Canada goes, he's going to drop the ball, and it's going to be an absolute epic failure. I don't think it's going to sustain, but it's going to be enough to keep him out. And again, it might be wish casting, and obviously this will be a video that will have my words recorded. So yeah, I think that that's what's going to happen.
You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world. and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Yeah, because there's a collision in the messages he's sending today, if you look at it rationally, right? He signed an executive order telling all government departments to find ways to reduce costs for ordinary Americans. He's unleashed an energy executive order to make it easier to drill on previously restricted land so you can get more oil in to lower gas prices and increase energy reliance. And if you were to hit Canada with tariffs, you make all of those, it works counter to all of those.
I think a huge part of it is to just create the framework for what capitalism was demanding, was like a further integration of these two economies to make it so that they could withstand a continued accelerated shift in multipolar global capitalism, and that by opening these markets, I ranted on this already, but yeah, like opening these markets to the U.S. and taking away certain aspects of the border to make it so that Canadian companies have more incentive to invest in America and vice versa. And because of the push on the labor policy, because of the push on immigration, it's going to create false scarcity on the labor market and create a condition where people will be more willing to work in more precarious conditions. What they'll probably do is implement a temporary worker or migrant worker policy, which will subject people to a new open border state that is in greater cooperation between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. It will, make them like intelligible to the state. But then what it will also do is give them a certain worker status that will make it so that they are able to work. They're not considered illegal, but what they are is not citizens, so that they don't have the same rights as citizens. So it's going to just create a false scarcity on the exploitable labor market, which is going to make it so that there is a demand for greater status to be given to immigrants so that they're considered not illegal, and that those people will be more willing to get that status because otherwise they're considered illegal in a place where it's far more criminal to be illegal, which will then make it so that those people are willingly subjected to a new open border state. And then that will make it so that they're willing to come work in Canada, in a mine and stuff like that. So that those corporations, like American corporations and things like that, who would have otherwise not invested in Canada because there's not a labor market, will now have a labor market. And this is what I just explained. Trump is creating the framework for that to happen by using bolstered rhetoric, by using tough guy rhetoric, so that the negotiation, when we concede our sovereignty to that, it's like we're getting a good deal, but we're actually submitting to an entirely new trade agreement. But the hilarious irony of all of this, though, is that that's actually what needs to happen in order to maintain global peace, because otherwise you corner American imperial interests into that. Like, that's what would have happened if Harris won, is you would have cornered imperial interests to have to lash out in a way that they wouldn't if you had someone who was willing to be a strongman and say, hey, Canada, you're ours now. Hey, Mexico, you're ours now. Because by doing that, now they don't have to say, hey, Syria, you're ours now. Not to say that they're not going to, but in the actual practical way of having to go to Iraq. Like she said it when we were watching a second ago. They get this certain type of high quality oil from either Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, or Canada. 3 of those are really not an option unless you want to take a military operation. The other one is very much an option. You just have to be willing to negotiate and create these conditions that both countries would be up for that to happen. The thing about that is that that's very not like a thing that a Republican would do. And it's very much a thing that like a liberal will do. But the problem is that there potentially might be a conservative dude taking over the Liberal Party, a very fiscal conservative, maybe socially liberal. Yeah, so that's the thing, though. I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying that military operations and invasions are expensive in terms of both political and regular capital. That is 1,000,000% true. And that's why doing these types of trade, like these greater consolidations of power through capitalism, is the path forward for peace. And it's not great, but it's either annihilation or greater exploitation because of capitalism. And the reason that framework has been set is because of China refusing to play a kinetic warfare game with the US and just saying, like, we're not going to war with you. We're just going to do capitalism better than you. That's the thing, is that Biden-Harris kept pushing and pushing to create the situation where China needed to use force. It never really happened. They were, military operations and stuff like that against Taiwan. But the thing is that they couldn't do that because they always need to be nice to their people in the Imperial core. They need to give their treats to their people in the Imperial core to make it seem like they're liberal and progressive. Trump doesn't give a fuck about that. And this is his calculus. He would rather take on a domestic opposition than have to deal with geopolitical insanity, like being a pariah on the geopolitical stage. That's why he's always trading off, looking like an asshole domestically with social shit and domestic policy that includes immigration and stuff like that, because he's willing to say those things that capitalism demands that the Biden administration and the Democrats can't do because it goes against their entire ideology. But you still saw them try to by being super hard on the border, basically adopting Trump's policy on the border and things like that. But the thing is that they still won't say racist shit. And it's the racist shit that makes him have a political base, right? But what he also doesn't do is go out and cause gigantic wars. He literally threatened Kim Jong-un in his last presidency, openly threatened him and said, if Rocket Man wants to play with his weapons, we'll show him, blah, blah, blah. What did he end up doing after saying that? He's the only fucking leader since 1945 to have any diplomatic relationship with North Korea. So, like, every time he says insane shit like that, he did more diplomatically on Korea than any president before him. Maybe Jimmy Carter, you can say. And I'm not endorsing Trump in any way. He's obviously a terrible fucking person. But because he's so incompetent and self-serving that he's willing to do and say that shit, he will say what's needed to garner his base domestically. But he's also such a self-serving narcissist that needs to be accepted among his peers as a global leader that then makes him a moderate geopolitically. Like, he's not a hawk. J.D. Vance is a fucking hawk, so I don't know how that's going to work. But anyways.
Aprendimos a quererte desde la histórica altura donde el sol de tu bravura le puso cerco a la muerte. Aquí se queda la clara, la entrañable transparencia de tu querida presencia, comandante Che Guevara.
That's the thing, is that the framework has been set by China by creating this hyper-capitalist competition. Yeah, he was a hawk on Cuba. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Cuba because of this global integration strategy. It's going to be incredibly crazy to see what happens with him on Cuba. I think that's a total active issue, because I honestly believe if you got the right person in the room with him and said, hey, you got to get this embargo on Cuba down, And if you do, Russia and China are going to give you this, this, and this, and Venezuela will give you this, this, and this. You know what I mean? Like, I think that he would do it. I'm not to say that that's a good thing, but he would be the one guy to do it because he doesn't care about ideology. He cares about, he can say quality of life. He can say, oh, we're going to bring great business to Cuba. And Cuba can say, yeah, it's still like China has great American business in China. It's not communist, right? It's not controlled. I mean, it's not controlled by the central, like by the Communist Party of China, right? Cuba can integrate developmentalist capitalism into their socialist system if people just let them. And that's the only reason why it's never happened, is because they know that if that happens, this is why. The business lobby is in favor of ending the embargo on Cuba, because it creates a great example of how that works and how it benefits both parties is Costa Rica, because Costa Rica changed their legal system to make it so that things like gambling, foreign investment, if you ended up becoming a citizen, things like that, all become a deep framework of their political system, which made it so that they can be, it's not colonialism, right? It's post-colonial developmentalism, so that they open up their market to the world, to global capitalism, but they have it on their terms. So like if you want to invest in property in Costa Rica, you have to be a citizen. You can't be a foreign national. Also, like they created all of these different laws so that companies would want to, like the sports betting thing and stuff like that, and crypto and stuff like that, because Costa Rica changed their laws to fit a demand that capitalism was calling for. And because of that, all of these different foreign investors went there. They didn't go there and exploit them. They went there and invested because their laws demanded it. That you can't go there and exploit them. You have to be a citizen. If you're a landholder, you have to be a citizen. So companies went there because it became viable for them to do business there, and it lifted their quality of life up exponentially. That's not socialism. It's capitalism, but it's controlled capitalism, state-controlled capitalism, developmentalism. The thing about it is that Cuba has a fucking socialist revolution that is still ongoing. So if you open up them to the market, right, they're going to become the cornerstone of, like, they will be. That's why there never has been like an official pink tide, is because Cuba has been cornered off from dealing with Brazil, Mexico, etc. As soon as Cuba is able to deal with all those other countries, they're going to be able to lift themselves up exponentially and then give the model to everyone else. This is what we need to do. And then they're off, right? And again, there's no one stupid enough to do that than Trump. And it's not because of any type of moral affinity. It's because he wants to say he's the guy who got that deal done. And if it's done in a way that it's like, if he can say, we're opening up the markets in Cuba, we're going to open up the markets for global investment in Cuba, and Cubans are like, yes, it's no longer a question about communism or socialism or whatever. There, he won. Now what are the Republicans going to say? They can't say shit. He can frame it as a victory. So can the fucking Cubans, the socialist Cubans, right? Because the socialist Cubans have their laws. Their laws will not be changed, right? It's not like there's going to be fucking casinos opening up overnight. If there are, they'll be run by the Cuban government. You know, capitalism doesn't care about communism. That's the thing, right? Capitalism wants as many open markets as possible. And that's why it becomes at this point now where the ideology of American hegemony is outdated, because capitalism's like, hey, we're going to do business with as many people as we want. We don't care about their ideology. That's why Nike's in Vietnam. That's why Apple's in fucking China. And this is what I'm saying. Wait until you don't have peasants in fucking Cuba working on farms, but you have people in Cuba working on fucking low-cost cars, like the e-cars that China's building. Or in Haiti. You know what I mean? Like the residual effect of, like, that's exactly what I'm saying. The residual effect of taking that embargo off Cuba, and then Cuba being able to show, because of their system and having laws to prevent foreign international capital from exploiting them, to say, Haiti, this is what you can do too. And then that creates the framework where, again, it's no longer about communism, right? It's about capitalism. And China set that framework. China is the one who set that framework, where it's like, let's make it so it's no longer a fucking struggle about ideology. That's what Stalin got wrong. Stalin took, Marxism, Leninism, and then made it a military struggle about fucking ideology, which you were never going to win because you were always outgunned, right? What China has done is they've now made it it's an ideological thing that's being played out in the free market. So it's like, hey, this is what you wanted, So it's like capitalism has no other choice but to be like, yeah, you're right. Let's go to the moon, And then it's America that's sitting in the corner being like, wait, what? And that's what we're living in. And this is the thing, is that Harris would not have been okay with that. The Harris administration under, fucking Cheney and all of those hawks, right? They would have done everything in their power to prevent that. But Trump is a deal maker. And it's not like this is like, it's not meant to be like hopeless optimism or anything like that. But that's the reality of the situation, is like Trump is selfish enough to not realize the ideological terms of what's happening. And capitalism is at the point that it doesn't care either. So, yeah.
Working hard every day, we got the heart to find a way. Nobody said it was an easy road, and we won't stop. We don't ever fold. We got big, big dreams, so you gotta believe in someone you trust to make them real. With one good plan, a future to build. Now it's up to you and me. Always fighting for you, just like when we started. We gotta make it through. All in now, we get it done. Always fighting for you, just like when we started. We gotta make it through. All in now, we get it done.
These are going to be negotiations that are going to go on for quite some time right now, and make no mistake about it, he's coming for us. I think it's a lot worse today than it was yesterday.
So an election's not on the back burner?
And I need a clear mandate from the people of Ontario to fight against.
David Patterson is Ontario's representative in Washington, and he joins me now. David Patterson, it's good to see you, sir. I wonder if you share the Premier's assessment that today you're worse off than yesterday. There's no 25% tariff. There's a study instead of an executive order on it. But, if he was determined to go ahead with the 25% across-the-board tariff, he probably would have done it today, don't you think? I mean, do you take any optimism from this delay and study rather than the day one action that he had threatened on social media?
No, I mean, I think everybody in Canada would love to have someone wave a wand and say your problems are all taken care of, but that would really be foolish. This is one of the more significant threats to the Canadian economy that we've seen in my memory. And so we are building great relationships. We've had a good day here in Washington with a lot of senators and House of Representatives visits here at the Canadian Embassy. We have to build on that. There's a lot of work to do here. Number one is let's protect our economy for the future, and then let's grow it. There's really an opportunity here as well, but we got to put the pedal to the metal.
You said this morning you thought it was very likely that there would be an executive order today imposing tariffs of some form, and that really was the consensus leading up to today. That a lot of people were convinced, even Daniel Smith, who went to Mar-a-Lago, that there was no way to avoid it on day one of a Trump presidency. Why do you think he didn't do it? What do you think is... I know it's hard to move around on Inauguration Day and talk to people because of security and schedules, but why do you think we are where we are as opposed to right smack in the middle of a trade war?
Well, I think I heard my friend David McNaughton commenting on inflation and some of the things that need to be thought about here in the United States. My perspective living here for the last year and thinking about this from the American perspective. Number one, the president needs to get his tax bill through. That's critical for the economy. He's got a razor-thin majority to work through. He needs to be able to show his Freedom Caucus that there are mechanisms for raising revenues. But, the best way to raise revenue is to build the economy together. We're not there yet. We have to make that case. And so there's a lot of work to do. It's not time to sort of give up on our homework. Let's keep working.
The study is not a tariff, but it's not nothing. And Canada and Mexico have been lumped in with China, at least in the initial wording from the president and his administration on this. What do you take from that he's putting Canada, a G7 NATO ally with a quarter of a century hemispheric trade agreement, in the same bucket as a non-market economy and agitator like China?
Yeah, I just today talking with a couple of senators, and all through the last year, I've always, in every conversation, said, look, if we have tariff guns, they should be aimed outward at China, not inward at each other.
The thing about Ford and what Doug Ford is doing, I think, like, Ford's battle against Trump's tariffs feels like the work of a premier safeguarding Ontario's economy, and more like the origin story of a guy who is angling to be a federal leader, whether it be the Conservative Party or whatever. And it's as if he's realized that to graduate from Ontario politics to the national stage, he needs to craft himself as like Canada's big boy, the guy who can stare down Trump while clutching a Tim Hortons cup, a man of the people who's also somehow a trade czar or a business czar. Starting with the LCBO move, Ford threatening to yank U.S. alcohol from store shelves if U.S. tariffs hits. I feel like on paper this is basically just about economic leverage, but let's not kid ourselves. It's obviously political theater. It's equivalent to bringing up your ex-partner's favorite playlist in a breakup fight. Like, it doesn't matter if it works. It's about looking like you're swinging the biggest stick in the room. It's Doug Ford's way of saying, I'm going to take on Trump and America and their Bud Light too. And then obviously all of these U.S. media appearances, Ford being on CNN, NBC, even today, he was on the Today Show earlier this week, talking up the importance of the Canada-U.S. trade agreements. And again, he's not just repping Ontario here, he's repping all of Canada. He's crossing into Prime Minister cosplay, except, instead of a nice suit, it's a slightly rumpled up blazer and the vibes of a suburban dad who thinks that he's the only guy at the barbecue who is able to fix the grill and grill the steak. The subtext is clear. Look, I can handle Americans. I'll do it for Ontario now, maybe for the rest of you later. But, there's more to it. Ford, he's pitched an enhanced Canada-U.S. energy partnership. This, again, attaches to like what I was talking about earlier with the economic strategy for false scarcity and energy going forward. This is technically a trade policy idea, but it's a federal level flex. He's sidestepping the usual premier stuff, healthcare budgets and potholes, to talk big picture, bilateral energy relations, etc. This is like the kind of move that you make when you sound like a leader who could headline a G7 summit, not a provincial legislator. And again, don't forget that his Team Canada approach, that Ford is suddenly like the Mr. National Unity figure, has been calling on everyone to band together against Trump's tariffs and framing Trump as like this big bad opposition. It's funny that this is coming from a guy who spent most of his time fighting with Ontario teachers and municipalities. He's somehow this like unifying figure. Sure, Doug. It's a bit like a guy who, like, again, splits the bar tab unevenly, declaring like that he is the expert, and then splits the beer tab unevenly. The most telling part for Ford here is that he is hinting at like an early provincial election, and it's the political equivalent of flipping the Monopoly board and demanding a rematch because someone landed on Boardwalk. Like, if he calls it here, it will be about tariffs. It'll be about solidifying his position as the guy, and things, he's going to demand a new mandate, take a victory lap, and he will get a whole bunch of extra swagger for when he eventually decides to take his talents from Toronto, from Queen's Park to the Parliament in Ottawa. So Doug Ford explicitly campaigning for as like Canada's representative in this struggle against and his tariffs. Is it a campaign for a federal conservative leader? Obviously, probably not yet, but with every anti-Trump soundbite and every big picture trade policy proposal, he's basically standing on the CN Tower shouting, "Look at me, I can do this job." Whether he makes it there or not, I feel like he's clearly auditioning, and honestly, it's probably going to work because the SEALs will clap for Doug. That's just the way that it works. Yeah, you know what that is? That's the sepia filter. The civilized country that's putting down Mexico with that sepia filter, that the way that we always look at Mexico as this dark yellow country, right? And it's the same thing that we do to China. And that's why like X and shit like that and Meta hate like the influencers who frame China as just like this ultra developed country that has high living standards for lower class people, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, China has its flaws too, but you see it through the way that they put this sepia filter. I'm using the term sepia filter that typically only applies to Mexico because it's literally a sepia filter. Yeah. Okay, so this goes back to what I was just saying. The thing is that this approach doesn't necessarily bode well for the global south. So this is what's happening. It doesn't bode well for countries in the global south who are liberal democracies like Chile or like El Salvador. What it does really benefit in this new developmentalist type of capitalist system is the countries who have the legal system to prevent hyper-exploitation. You know, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil in a way because of Lula, obviously Venezuela, again, not perfect, but, and then Mexico. The reason why Mexico, like we've seen inflation defeat all of these incumbent presidents throughout the global south, throughout America. It's going to probably happen here in some weird way as well, but inflation has turned the political spectrum further and further right. Why hasn't it happened in Mexico? Because Mexico, under AMLO's party, Mexico has laws set up where they're becoming a more and more social democratic country. And the way that they are doing it so that it's not framed in like a ideological framework is that they're continuously using the language of capitalism. The Morena, I think is the name of the party that AMLO was the leader of. They're not communists, but they're also not anti-communists. Sheinbaum is a fucking red diaper baby who is the daughter of communists, and she is a left-wing environmentalist, but she also knows how to play the game. And the game is you have to do developmentalist capitalism to make the framework no longer about an ideological struggle. Mexico has set up a whole bunch of new legal laws over the past since 2016, since AMLO, that has made it so foreign investment is harder and harder to come in, and there's more and more of a social welfare system that is picking up Mexico and their quality of life. Similar to Brazil, their fucking foreign policy isn't amazing because they have to keep a block on immigration because they are legitimately being threatened by a fucking a true imperial force. And that's the thing, is that Sheinbaum has a 78% approval rating as a Jewish woman in a highly conservative country. And it's not because she has any type of ideological affinity for her base. It's because she's making people's material conditions better. So people who are socially opposed to her and what she represents can't help but vote for her because the opposition would make their material conditions worse. And it's like, oh my God, can you imagine transcending politics to actually just matter about your material conditions, and that these fucking virtues actually don't mean shit? You know what I mean? But in our politics, virtues mean everything. The reason, though, why Mexico has such a shitty foreign policy on immigration and stuff like that is because they have an actual imperium against them, and that's the United States. Trump has declared like a national emergency on the southern border. This labeling of Mexico and Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorists is a policy that will manage to be both, cartoonishly evil and comically stupid, which again is a hallmark of American imperialism in the 20th century. On its face, right, it's sold as like a tough on crime bravado, this bold new strategy to protect Americans from, the Scrooge of the drug cartels. But when you peel back, like even just a single layer, you find the same old American imperial playbook, which is an self-inflicted problem dressed up as an excuse to wave their big imperial stick around. The foreign terrorist designation, this idea of calling cartels terrorists, is going to unlock a magic toolbox that will be able to freeze their assets, stiffen penalties, sanction, and of course, military operations in Mexico. It sounds very cool if you're a fucking idiot who thinks drones solve problems, but that's the thing, is that's a very large amount of Trump's base. These cartels don't operate like Al-Qaeda, and labeling them as terrorists isn't going to change the fact that they're deeply embedded in the American system, right? And it's just going to really, it's again another instance of Trump taking his pigs from the market and bringing them home to slaughter. Because if he does what he says he's going to do, he's going to unravel all of these FBI and CIA relations to these drug cartels who have been helping them in South America. And so it's not a bug of global capitalism. It is the feature of American imperialism in the global South. And calling them terrorists and freezing their assets is not going to change anything. And it just really reeks of finding a new way to vilify Mexico. He spent his whole campaign of painting Mexicans as villains, whether they were rapists or criminals. And now they're being framed as like the foot soldiers of a drug terror axis. And it's really just political theater that will shift the blame for America's problems, America's imperious influence in the global South that is causing all of these problems that he's claiming are coming up to the United States, the opioid epidemic. It all is meant to create this external other that, shifts away the attention from finding the real culprits like Purdue pharma executives and countries that incentivize pharmaceutical investment and stuff like that. Like here in Canada, decades of hollowing out labor markets, hollowing out a healthcare system, all of that you shift the blame from by doing this wag the dog type thing, by blaming cartels, because nothing says accountability to U.S. citizens like blaming the supply chain while ignoring that you are the demand for it. So this idea of the U.S.'s military action in Mexico, I think if we just pause to appreciate like the sheer hubris of thinking that this is going to end in any way that's going to be positive, the U.S. has like an amazing track record in Latin America. Just ask any country that we've helped deeply destabilize in the name of fighting communism, drugs, or installing liberal democracy, or whatever else was convenient at the time. Mexico is a country that is ravaged by cartel violence and corruption because of the United States. And are they supposed to benefit from this additional chaos of American intervention? No, but sure. Let's send Hellfire missiles into Sonola and see if that helps things. What could go wrong? Again, this is just a classic example of how it's going to shift what should be one of America's closest allies, a labor force that could help lift America out of its economic issues if it had cooperation with them, further towards the opposition of global hegemony. Watch how fast Mexico is integrated into the BRICS economy. And that's the thing, is that the irony, of course, of all of this is that the cartels would not be half as powerful if it wasn't for the U.S. and their imperial forces. From the U.S. military's insatiable appetite for drugs to financial institutions happily laundering cartel money, the real enablers are obviously on Wall Street, not in Mexico City. And Trump's plan here really doesn't touch on any of that. It's much easier to just bomb or invade someone else's country than to clean up your own. So yeah, in the end, this isn't really about solving the drug problem. It's about theatrics. It's about a guy who has built a fake university and steak brand, pretending that he's the world's toughest cop, but not for geopolitical reasons, going after the bad guys in a new framework that they've created will be more and more acceptable in a manufactured consent way. And obviously, like every other imperial misadventure, because he said that they were going to go on new adventures in his inauguration speech. I think things like that really only guarantee more death for American citizens, more instability for the American economy, and more opportunities for defense contractors to sell weapons, and also for America's opposition to create new alliances that otherwise would not have been created. So it's less a policy and more of a fever dream brought to life by a man who thinks foreign policy is like managing a fucking casino. Just double down until we're broke or we've won. And yeah, that's what I think is going to happen with Mexico. And I think that Mexico is set up better than they ever have been, like geopolitically, to be able to ward off what's happening, because they don't have corrupt officials in power anymore. Like maybe on a local level they do, but I think Mexico has done a lot to clean up a lot of internal corruption. I do think that there is a chance that we could see like a military coup. I know that they have warned about a type of military coup happening in Mexico over the last little while, just because of the way that Mexico is trying to reform their judicial system by making it so that judges and I think senators are no longer like appointed. They have to be voted by a caucus of the voted. So like they have to actually be like acceptable people, which will make it so that every elected official on the judicial side is going to be vetted, which is going to cause a shitload of fucking problems, which, hey, maybe that's why Trump's going to do what he's going to do. Because this is like to go full circle, what I was saying. That's why Mexico has to have like shitty foreign policy on immigration and shit like that, because they have to ward off their imperial forces that are coming against them because of what they're going to do by reforming their judiciary, which, whether or not Trump was, like, if it was Biden, this would be happening either way. It's just that Trump is savvier and, again, willing to say the things that the Democrats wouldn't be willing to say. And because it's like, oh, we go after terrorists, but not our allies, etc. And so he's changing the framework, making it so that this type of like military operation is more like politically tenable, as opposed to like we're going after terrorists, etc. I wanted to go back quickly just to finish the thought that the thing is that this approach doesn't necessarily bode well for the global south. It doesn't bode well for people in the global south who live in liberal democracies like Chile and stuff like that. But what it does do is it forces countries who are somewhat progressive, right, like Mexico, like Brazil, to go through this process to codify the progresses that they've put in place through their political struggles. We're seeing this again. I'm not saying any of these places are perfect in any way, but like we've seen this with Brazil, we've seen this with Mexico, we've seen this with obviously Colombia. We're going to see it in an insane amount after the freak Milei is no longer in power. If there ever is some type of political transition in Venezuela that isn't like an imperial operation to get Maduro out of power, where Maduro can hand over to like a political party that can have an election that is like controlled and not going to be affected by, liberalism, similar to a great example of why, like in Chile, they had a plebiscite referendum to change their constitution, to get rid of the old, the coup constitution, essentially, right? And in that referendum, it started with the popular opinion, like 70% yes, to change the constitution, to get rid of I'm blanking on his name, the guy who did the coup, but the guy who instilled the coup, he changed the constitution to basically prevent any type of political opposition from creating state power over corporations. Chile was really the first like military neoliberal political economy. Argentina very quickly right after. So in 2022, Chile had this referendum. It came to 70%. Public opinion was for the yes. As soon as that became like a thing, and like international interests saw that they were going to change their constitution to, land reform, to do the type of things that I was talking about, make it so that international capital is not allowed to just come in and exploit people. And, so that there needs to be social corporatism. Corporations that come in need to benefit the citizens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When Chile was going to move to vote that new constitutional referendum in, what did they do? Capital came in and changed public opinion. And the fucking referendum was like 60-40 no, even though the entire reason that it was even put forth was because there was such a strong demand, to the point that 2/3 of people were for it. But then when it came to elections, what happened? Capitalism dictated that public opinion was not that. That's liberal democracy. That's fake democracy, right? Because capitalism comes in and dictates what public opinion is. In other places like Cuba, Mexico, China, right? The electoral system is controlled by the state. So it's not just you don't have foreign capital dictating what the outcome is. And I always point to that fucking plebiscite referendum in 2022. It's just such an insanely perfect example, because it was like 70% yes. As soon as the campaign started for like advertising, like the legal framework opened for advertisers to start putting money in on the no side, it was just unfair, and it lost. And so this is the thing, is that system that I'm talking about, of this new type of developmentalist capitalism. Yes, it is not great for countries that have liberal democracies, because they can be hyper exploited. But what it does is it pushes the demand for the people to move left, right? To codify what they've won in the streets or in local politics and stuff like that on a national level. And again, we've seen somewhat of a pink wave with, Lula is like pretty just basically a liberal who has socialist affinities, not perfect, but still better than Bolsonaro by a quadrillion. And throughout most of South America, about half of South America has moved left, while the other half has moved right. What's going to happen when Milei is no longer in power? The forces that have built up opposing him are going to last for so long, because he's demanding them, right? And that's the thing. The more and more that this hyper-capitalist exploitation is going to happen in the global south, the more and more that the people there, because they're either going to be subjected to liberal democracy that's going to push them to literally codify their own demise, similar to what we've seen in Chile, or they're going to codify the battles that they've won in the streets on a national level, which we've seen in Mexico. So it's like a two-ways thing. And I believe that there's another path where the countries who have these right-wing regimes in power, like Argentina right now, the backlash of their impositions are going to be so bad that a country that was Peronist, more like a social liberal, social democrat, not developmentalist, but still liberal, they will be more left. They will be, because of the political revolution that has happened in the wake of Milei and his insane economic reforms that are trying to strip away workers' rights and things like that. So yeah, I think that that's the thing, is that it does not bode well for people in the global south who live in liberal democracies. But what it does is it's going to put the pedal down on the contradictions, which will either make people choose a side more, right? For the most part, I will say, like, we've seen positive changes, because these are people like in Bolivia, right? Like in Bolivia, the political struggle right now is between two factions of the same socialist party. Because of like the post-World War II, post-colonial crack-up that happened, there's still a pink wave that has influence in the global south because of the Soviet Union and stuff like that. And also because there's people there who have like a connection to the old collectivist, indigenous culture that has its material interests align with things like socialism and things like that. So there's way more of a chance for it to go the right way, as opposed to here, where almost all of it's going to take some work. And the problem is that we also don't have the social infrastructure because of capitalism, like in hyper exploitation. We don't have the infrastructure. We need to have like a social revolution before we can have a political one.
They're not saying no, though, Minister. They just seem to be saying not right now. And they've announced this study looking at Canada, Mexico, and China's trade practices and having that study, I guess, determine what they do. So what is your plan as a Minister of International Trade to influence that study, to get involved in it and have input into what the Americans are actually looking at and assessing as this process goes on?
Well, I think it's really important that we talk to the Americans and to see those areas of commonality, but to also see some of the areas where there may be issues that we need to be working on, and we do that together. I would say to the Americans that if you look at what Canada has done and what Canada does today, being the top customer to 36 American states, we buy more than the UK, Japan, and China combined from the United States. That counts for something. When we ship our materials and our goods to the Americans, 70% of it the Americans take and add value to it, and then it helps Americans be more competitive.
But, Minister, the size and value of the Canadian market, the volumes of trades, the interconnectedness of the supply chains, this is stuff the American government knows, right? These are things that they are aware of, yet President Trump seems to set intent on this. So how do you use the time that you have now with whatever is happening with this study to find out what he really wants?
I think like one of the biggest things to take away from what he said, and like we're going to drill, baby, drill. It really, I feel like it's going to put a greater demand. It's like renewing a greater demand on oil at a time when we should be shifting away from oil. So it's again that it's the tail end of like the war on terror, war for oil, 9/11 type, that has ran out, the momentum of that push for the scarcity on oil, again, at a time that we should have already been transitioning away. 9/11 came and made it so that, no, we're going to go and war for oil, et cetera, et cetera. But the momentum of that has ran out. So Trump comes into power now and he's going to renew that, but not because of any type of political ideology, but simply because of the demand that capitalism is pudding, and he is ready to embody that in the political framework that he works for him. But it's not about creating abundance of oil. It's about gaming the system to keep oil and gas where it needs to be and to keep oil and gas companies at the top, no matter what the costs are. So when he talks about unleashing the American energy market, what he's really doing is setting up the conditions for these companies to pull back and to pull out their oldest tricks, right? Manufacturing scarcity to drive up prices while pretending to be doing the opposite. It's a scam wrapped in a hard hat photo op. So the thing is, starting with the deregulation price thing, Trump wants to tear up environmental rules, everything from fuel efficiency standards to limits on drilling in protected areas. On paper, that sounds like it'll flood the market with cheap energy. But what happens next, when you cut oversight, you give oil companies a green light to play games with supply. So they'll pump just enough to drop prices for a bit, and then they're always watching the bigger picture, how to keep the scarcity myth alive. They slash production at any time to stabilize prices, which really means keeping profits as high as possible. It's not about abundance, it's about control. So that's the thing, is like when you look at his obsession with opening up new drilling sites, Alaska, offshore locations, anywhere that's been protected, etc. Sure, it's going to make headlines. It's these bombastic political talking points, but it's a short-term play. You are going to flood the market with new oil. Prices will drop for a little bit. But the trick here is that once prices drop to a super low, companies start pulling back production. They've done it before. Obviously, they do it again. And who benefits? The big players benefit, the ones who can weather the price dip long enough to crush smaller competitors. That's how you get an oil market dominated by a few giants who can manipulate the supply and demand like it's a magic trick. It also pushes out countries, developing countries like Venezuela, etc., who have oil, from being able to use that oil to leverage it for geopolitical reasons, right? The other thing is obviously the LNG exports, which Trump is all in on. Again, this looks like abundance. America is going to fuel the world. But the LNG thing is just another tool for market manipulation. By controlling how much gets exported and where, the U.S. creates, again, these little scarcity bubbles in different parts of the world. It's like OPEC, but with more flag waving and less subtlety. And it's not just about profit. It's a geopolitical flex that if you control energy, you control leverage, but you're also locking in the global market into this gigantic scarcity scam. And the real kicker with this narrative is that Trump uses it to sell all of this. He talks about energy like it's a national security issue. Like if we don't drill every square inch of the country, we're going to get conquered by wind turbine armies, right? And that's the scarcity story, right? It's been debunked over and over again, but the U.S. continues to produce record amounts of oil and gas, and renewable energy is exploiting globally. But the narrative is crucial for the oil industry. If people think that we're always on the edge of running out, they're less likely to ask why Exxon has just made another $100 billion, right? And it makes it so that the demand to transition to a different system is no longer as viable because there's so much interest because of America's economy being directly connected to it. And so what Trump's doing here is in no way new, but it's very dangerous because he's doubling down on a absolutely dying by any, market forces standards, an absolute dying fossil fuel industry and its most destructive habits, deregulating, concentrating power, and creating this artificial scarcity bubble, and sell it all as patriotism. And it's in no way about energy independence. It's about locking us into a system where scarcity is not real, but it's profitable for the right people. And people are the ones who are stuck paying the bill. That's how it works. One other thing that I wanted to mention, it looks like I still have some time here. So yeah, I'll wrap it up by saying Trump's return to power here in 2025, it doesn't just mean that the U.S. gets another 4 years of chaotic press conferences and policy announcements that feel like they were cooked up during a steak dinner at Mar-a-Lago. It's much bigger than that. It's very much a geopolitical wrecking ball, and Canada, sweet, sweet settler colonial, innocent Canada, is obviously going to be standing right in its path, holding a Tim Hortons cup like a white flag. So if we're looking at the U.S. reaction, liberals down there are going to lose their collective minds after 4 years feeling smugly superior during the Biden administration, a presidency so tepid that it felt like keeping coffee on too long. That same group of liberals is obviously going to swing left hard because Trump's nationalists, anti-immigrant economic protectionism makes people desperate for alternatives. And it doesn't even matter if they themselves believe it. It's that's the things that need to be said to get popular support. It's like a reverse genie, because like every wish that he grants comes with an even worse curse. So American liberals will do what they always do, is they will overcompensate loudly. And this is where Canada is going to come in, because here in 2025, in our federal election looming, the Conservatives, led by Paul Evier, are walking into this thing like they've already won. And I feel like because years after Trudeau's, fake progressive governance, selfies and pipelines, essentially, the Liberals are leaderless and tired. And Pierre's pitch is basically simple. Trump's a bully and Canada needs a guy who can look tough while getting wedged in between American imperial forces and the global market forces. So to a lot of voters, that's kind of sounds appealing, but when you really break it down, that's not actually how it's going to work, because the twist to all of this is that Trump could basically accidentally save the Canadian liberals, because Trump's American first policies, slapping tariffs on Canadian imports, it's all going to be a total mess. Jobs are going to be at risk. The GDP is going to be on a complete wobble. And how is Pierre Poilievre going to promise to fix it? By cozying up to Trump, by using Bitcoin? It's going to be like pie in the sky stuff. And this alignment with Trump's brand of chaos is going to make him look a lot more of a stooge to moderate conservatives who are now seeing Trump as further and further as more and more as a liability rather than someone you want to be politically aligned with, especially in urban and suburban areas where people they like their capitalism to do their racism for them and their politics to be less like WWE storylines. The liberals, if they do play this right, could rebrand themselves as the defenders of Canadian values, inclusivity, progressivism, and whatever else you can slap on a campaign poster that makes you look morally pure. Trump's social conservative policies, heard him saying that it was American policy today that there was only two genders. That is going to backfire up here immensely, where even our conservatives like to pretend that they care about being nice about this type of stuff. If liberals are able to tie Pierre to Trump's ideology and his overt anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans comments, that's going to make this an election more of a referendum on whether Canada becomes America's little brother in a MAGA than an actual election. If that's the case, they might just be able to pull off that magical comeback. And that's the thing, is that Trump is a wild card here. Trump has a talent for making his enemies lose their minds in ways that are frankly embarrassing. If Canadian progressives go full liberal, lawn signs about the, no hate here and stuff like that, Poilievre could still win. Like, the political forces that would have otherwise stayed quiet in opposition to Biden, in relativity to certain type of social causes that are more further left that would have hurt Biden, right? Those same political forces are going to take up those causes against Trump. This is going to be happening at the same time that Canada is going through an election where the Liberal Party is going to be going through a change. And if they can latch on to that struggle of opposition to Trump, they're going to be able to catch the tide while it's rising. Well, the Conservatives are going to just tank. So basically, that's Canada in 2025. And the election is basically going to be a fight over whether they're smart enough to learn from the mistakes of the Democrats or dumb enough to cosplay as their sequel. And so, yeah, that's what I think is going to happen. Okay, I mean, they won't learn, but market forces will make it so that it'll always happen by the way, it'll always happen through the dialect that seemed like what Trump is doing right now with the rhetoric against the Canada, right? Opening up the U.S. market and new conditions to create a greater multipolar global power structure is never going to come from America through the rhetoric of progress, because actual liberal imperialism doesn't want that. It's going to come through the rhetoric of this idiot, this fucking self-serving moron trying to do what's best for him, And that's where progress is going to come from. It's going to come from material interest aligning way more than somebody deciding to do the right thing. So with that, that'll be it for this one. I'll be back sometime next week at the very start of February. So yeah, it took a little bit longer to get this one out just because it was a long one, kind of like a special episode. I'll be a little bit quicker on the draw, I'll say, going forward. But apart from that, thank you very much for listening to me rant, and stay tuned for more content from me. Thanks for listening to Sparkcast. Talk to you later.
Burst into flame. Earth is always